The Interstellar Academy had exactly 3 rules about survival training. Don't die, don't lose the equipment, and absolutely don't file a complaint until after you've completed the exercise. Naturally, Cadet Chirrut was already mentally drafting his complaint before the shuttle had even finished its spectacular nosedive into the canopy of Epsilon 7. The planet itself was considered a moderate challenge in the Academy's catalog of death worlds, where they sent cadets to build character. It had breathable air, which was thoughtful. It also had carnivorous plants, venomous insects the size of dinner plates, and weather patterns that suggested the atmosphere had anger management issues. The Academy brass called this enriching educational opportunities. The cadets called it reasons to fake illness on training day. Owen watched the emergency lights flicker and die with the kind of resignation usually reserved for watching someone pour milk before cereal. Around him, the other 4 cadets were experiencing what psychologists would call acute technological separation anxiety, and what Owen would call losing their collective minds. "The primary systems are offline," Prismata announced, her crystalline body refracting the dim emergency lighting into panicked rainbows across the shuttle's interior. "Secondary systems are offline. Tertiary backup systems are also offline. I'm detecting a pattern that concerns me." "Concerns you?" Chirrut's antennae were vibrating at a frequency that suggested he was approximately 3 seconds from a complete molt. "Concerns you. We've crash-landed on a Category 4 wilderness planet with 0 functional technology, and you're merely concerned?" Nemos, whose aquatic species required a personal hydration suit to function on land, was making a sound like water going down a very disappointed drain. "My suit's environmental controls are malfunctioning. I have approximately 48 hours before I enter critical dehydration." 48 hours. Sella's tail was bottle-brushed to twice its normal size, her feline features twisted in what her species considered maximum alarm. "The emergency beacon isn't transmitting. Regulation 47B clearly states we should remain at the crash site, but if no one knows we've crashed, remaining here seems philosophically problematic." Owen unbuckled his harness and stood, scanning the crumpled interior of what used to be a state-of-the-art training shuttle, and was now an expensive metal tent. "Right, so the gear locker?" "Compromised," Prismata said, gesturing toward the rear of the shuttle where the cargo section had folded in on itself like origami designed by someone having a bad day. "All survival equipment is either destroyed or inaccessible beneath 17 tons of twisted hull plating. Medical supplies? Crushed. Communication devices? Crushed. The emergency rations? Also crushed, and now leaking something that's either nutritional paste or hydraulic fluid. Possibly both." Owen nodded slowly, hands on his hips, surveying the disaster with the air of someone mentally rearranging weekend plans rather than contemplating potential death. "Could be worse." 4 pairs of alien eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from disbelief to the kind of anger that suggested they were reconsidering the Academy's strict non-violence policies. "Could be worse." Chirrut's voice hit a pitch that probably violated several interstellar noise ordinances. "Human, we are stranded on a hostile world with no equipment, no supplies, no communication, and no rescue timeline. Please explain the mathematical formula by which this situation could deteriorate further." "Could be raining," Owen said cheerfully, right before the sky opened up and proved him catastrophically wrong. The rain on Epsilon 7 didn't believe in gentle introductions. It arrived with the subtlety of a cargo freighter and the temperature of melted ice, turning the forest around them into a gray wall of water that suggested the planet was personally offended by their presence. "I'm filing a formal complaint," Chirrut announced, water streaming off his carapace. "As soon as we're rescued, if we're rescued, I'm pre-filing it mentally. Your complaint is noted and will be given all the consideration it deserves," Owen said, which was diplomatic speak for absolutely none. He was already moving toward the shuttle's emergency exit, which had helpfully jammed halfway open, creating a gap just wide enough to make leaving uncomfortable. "Where are you going?" Sella demanded. "Protocol clearly states that in the event of emergency landing, Cadets should remain with the vessel until rescue arrives. Protocol also probably says something about having working equipment and not dying of exposure, Owen called back, squeezing through the gap. I'm going to look around. Don't touch anything that looks important. Everything looks important, Nemos gurgled. We're in an alien wilderness. But Owen was already gone, swallowed by the rain and the forest beyond, leaving 4 cadets alone with their panic and their very comprehensive academy training that had somehow failed to include a single lecture on what to do when literally everything goes wrong at once. Prismata began calculating survival probabilities, which was her species' version of stress crying. Chirrut started mentally organizing his complaint by severity level and regulatory citation. Nemos checked his hydration suit's reservoir for the 18th time in as many minutes. Sella stared at the gap where Owen had disappeared and wondered if humans simply had a different definition of danger than the rest of the galaxy. 20 minutes later, Owen returned, absolutely soaked, carrying an armful of various plant matter that dripped mud and rainwater across the shuttle floor. Good news, he announced. There's a cave system about half a kilometer west, dry, defensible, close to a water source. You found, shelter. Prismata's relief was visible in the way her crystalline structure brightened slightly. That's excellent. However, current Academy protocol for crash scenarios recommends remaining at the landing site to facilitate rescue operations. Academy protocol assumes working beacons and predictable rescue windows, Owen said, dropping his collection of sticks and vines onto the floor. We have neither. We have rain, we have night coming in about 3 hours, and we have whatever made those tracks I found about 50 meters from here. Tracks. 4 voices, 1 word. Multiple octaves of alarm. Big tracks. Recent tracks. Tracks that suggest something large, carnivorous, and probably curious about the loud noise our shuttle made when it redecorated this section of forest. Owen began sorting through his gathered materials with the focus of someone who had a plan. So here's the new protocol. We take what we can carry, we move to defensible shelter, and we don't get eaten. Questions? Several thousand, Chirrut said weakly. But I suspect you're not interested in my comprehensive list of safety violations we're about to commit. You're learning, Owen said approvingly. Now, everyone grab something. We're moving in 10 minutes. Moving where? Sella's ears were flat against her skull. And carrying what? All our equipment is destroyed. Owen held up a particularly long, flexible vine. We'll make new equipment. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that occurs when multiple species simultaneously try to process information that doesn't align with any of their educational programming or cultural frameworks. Make, Prismata finally ventured. You're going to construct survival equipment from plant matter and rocks and whatever else we find. Humans used to do this all the time before we figured out the whole technology thing. Owen was already stripping smaller branches from a longer piece of wood, examining its straightness with a critical eye. It's called primitive survival, or camping, depending on how much complaining is involved. Your species survived by manually crafting tools from raw environmental materials? Nemos sounded somewhere between horrified and academically intrigued. That's barbaric. That's Tuesday, Owen corrected. Now come on. Grab some of these branches. We've got shelter to reach before whatever made those tracks decides to investigate the crunchy aliens in the broken metal box. Nothing motivates like practical fear. Within 8 minutes, 4 alien cadets who had never carried anything heavier than a datapad were hauling armfuls of sticks, vines, and various plant materials through a forest that seemed personally committed to making them miserable. Owen led the way, moving with a confidence that suggested he'd done this before, which was absolutely not true, but they didn't need to know that. Behind him, the sounds of civilized beings encountering uncivilized nature created a symphony of complaint that would have made any academy instructor proud. Somewhere in the distance, something large made a sound that was probably territorial and definitely unwelcoming. The survival exercise had officially begun, and not a single piece of technology would be involved in whether they passed or failed. The only question was whether they'd live long enough to file those complaints Chirrut was composing. The cave Owen had found was, by extremely generous standards, adequate. By the standards of 4 cadets who had spent their entire lives in climate-controlled environments with adjustable gravity and automated comfort systems, it was a hole in a rock that smelled vaguely of something that had died there previously, and decided the location had character. "This is shelter." Chirrut stood at the entrance, antennae drooping in what his species called profound architectural disappointment. "I've seen waste disposal units with more amenities. It's dry, it's defensible, and nothing's currently living in it," Owen said, depositing his armload of gathered materials in the corner. "That's 3 more advantages than the crashed shuttle offered." Prismata was running calculations again, her crystalline form flickering with mathematical anxiety. "I've computed our rescue probability matrix. Assuming standard Academy emergency response protocols, accounting for our deviation from the planned training route, and factoring in the complete communications blackout, we have a 23.7% chance of rescue within the next 72 hours. "And after 72 hours? Sella asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. "The probability curve becomes discouraging. She means we're statistically dead," Nemos translated, his hydration suit making concerning gurgling noises. "My suit reserves are already at 60% capacity. I'm going to be the first casualty of this disaster, and I want it noted in the official record that I oppose this entire training exercise from the beginning." "Noted," Owen said, examining the pile of materials he'd gathered. "Now, who wants to learn how to make rope?" The question hung in the air like a particularly awkward social mistake. "Rope," Chirrut repeated slowly, as if testing the word for hidden meanings. "You're going to manufacture cordage from plants, using manual labor. Unless you've got a better idea. Yes, we wait here, maintain minimal energy expenditure, and trust in the Academy's rescue procedures that have been refined over 3 centuries of interstellar operation." Chirrut settled himself on a relatively flat rock with the air of someone making a philosophical stand. "I will be filing Form 7743A, Emergency Situation Report with Administrative Grievance Addendum, mentally until rescue arrives." "You do that," Owen said cheerfully, already stripping long fibers from one of the vines he'd collected. "The rest of you, watch this. It's actually pretty simple once you get the technique down." What followed was approximately 40 minutes of the most bewildering cultural education any of them had ever received. Owen took plant fibers, twisted them, combined them, and through a process that looked suspiciously like manual labor without any technological assistance whatsoever, created actual functional rope. Prismata watched with the intensity of someone observing a magic trick and trying to calculate the physics. "You're manually restructuring plant cellular material into a tensile support structure using only physical manipulation." "I'm braiding," Owen corrected. "It's what humans did before we invented everything else." "But why would your species maintain this knowledge?" Sella's tail was twitching with genuine curiosity now. "You have advanced manufacturing. You have molecular assemblers. Why remember how to make rope from plants?" Owen paused in his work, considering. "Because sometimes the power goes out. Sometimes you're stranded on a planet with 4 aliens who are having collective meltdowns. Sometimes it's useful to know how to solve problems without needing a computer to hold your hand through it." "Our computers don't hold our hands," Nemos protested. "They provide essential computational support for complex decision-making processes." "Right, so when they break, you file mental complaints and calculate your probability of death. Very productive." Owen held up a length of completed rope, tested its strength, and nodded with satisfaction. "This will hold about 30 kilos. Not great, but good enough for what we need." "And what exactly do we need rope for?" Chirrut had abandoned his rock throne and was now watching Owen's hands with reluctant fascination. "Building things, securing things, climbing things if we need to. Rope is useful. Here, try it." Owen handed a bundle of fibers to the insectoid cadet. "Twist 2 strands clockwise, then wrap them around each other counterclockwise. The opposing tensions create the strength." Chiric's multiple manipulator appendages were actually well suited for the task, which he discovered with obvious surprise. Within minutes, he had produced a small section of serviceable cordage, which he stared at with the expression of someone who had just discovered their degree in stellar navigation qualified them to drive a ground vehicle. "I made rope," he announced, wonder and horror mixing in his voice, "with my own appendages, using plant matter." "Welcome to primitive technology," Owen said. "It gets worse." He wasn't wrong. Over the next hour, Owen introduced them to concepts that violated everything their civilized upbringings had taught them about proper resource acquisition. He showed them how to identify useful plants versus poisonous ones, how to find straight branches suitable for structural purposes, and how to test materials for strength and flexibility. Prismata documented everything with the kind of obsessive detail that suggested she was either planning to write a comprehensive academic paper or preparing evidence for future therapy sessions. Sella discovered that her species' natural climbing abilities translated surprisingly well to scrambling up rock faces to reach better materials. Even Nemos, limited by his hydration suit, found himself offering surprisingly useful observations about water flow patterns and potential collection points. Chiric continued to file mental complaints while simultaneously becoming disturbingly proficient at fiber processing. "Right," Owen said, surveying their modest collection of processed materials and looking far too pleased with himself. "Now comes the fun part. If this is the boring part, I'm deeply concerned about your definition of fun," Sella muttered. Owen began arranging small pieces of dry wood and plant fiber in a specific configuration. "We need fire. The emergency thermal units in the shuttle," Prismata began, "are in the shuttle, which is half a kilometer away, in the dark, near the large predator tracks." Owen positioned a flat piece of wood on the ground and selected a straight stick. "So we're making fire the old-fashioned way." "You cannot possibly be suggesting what I think you're suggesting," Nemos said, his suit's water circulation increasing with agitation. "If you think I'm suggesting friction-based thermal ignition using processed wood materials, then yes, I'm absolutely suggesting that." Owen was already setting up what looked like an absurdly primitive device. A stick, a curved piece of wood, some of their newly made rope, and a flat base piece. "That's a bow drill," Prismata said suddenly, her crystalline structure brightening with recognition. "I studied primitive human technology in my comparative civilization course. The theoretical efficiency is remarkably poor." "The theoretical efficiency doesn't matter when it's the only option that doesn't require batteries," Owen pointed out. He demonstrated the setup, the rope wrapped around a vertical stick, the bow moving back and forth to spin it, the stick's end grinding against the baseboard. It looked ridiculous. It looked like something a child would assemble from random forest debris. It looked like it absolutely shouldn't work. Owen began moving the bow back and forth. The stick spun. Friction built. And after about 3 minutes of consistent effort, smoke began rising from the baseboard. 4 alien cadets leaned forward in unconscious synchronization, watching smoke appear from literally nothing but mechanical effort and patience. "Impossible," Chiric breathed. "You're creating combustion through manual kinetic energy transfer." "I'm making fire with sticks," Owen corrected, not breaking rhythm. "Humans did this for thousands of years." The smoke thickened. Owen carefully transferred the glowing ember to a bundle of dry tinder, cupping it gently and blowing steadily. The smoke increased. A tiny flame appeared, tentative and fragile. Then the tinder caught. An actual fire bloomed in Owen's hands. He transferred it quickly to the prepared fire pit, feeding it carefully with progressively larger pieces of wood, until a respectable campfire crackled in their cave, casting warm light across stone walls and illuminating 4 alien faces displaying various stages of existential crisis. "You made fire," Sella said quietly, "without technology, without power sources, without any tools except things you found on the ground." "Yep." Owen sat back, looking satisfied with his work. "And now we have light, warmth, a way to purify water, and a psychological comfort factor that's worth its weight in ration packs. Not bad for an afternoon's work. Prismata was calculating again, but this time her flickering seemed less like panic and more like furious academic interest. The energy expenditure compared to output ratio is inefficient, but the resource availability and sustainability factors are remarkably favorable. This is actually a superior survival strategy, given our current limitations. Almost like humans figured this out through extensive trial and error across multiple millennia. Owen said dryly, "Your species developed entire technological civilizations while maintaining knowledge of resource acquisition at this fundamental level." Nemos's suit burbled with what might have been respect. "That's either paranoid or brilliant. Usually both," Owen admitted. "Now, about that water problem of yours. I saw a stream on the way here. We can boil water, let it cool, and refill your suit's reservoir. It won't be as perfectly balanced as your standard hydration solution, but it'll keep you from desiccating. You're going to manually purify water using thermal processing?" Nemos sounded like Owen had just offered to perform surgery with sharpened rocks, which, given the trajectory of this conversation, wasn't entirely off the table. "Unless you'd prefer dehydration." The human makes a compelling argument, Nemos conceded. Outside their cave, night had properly fallen over Epsilon 7, bringing with it the sounds of a forest that was very much alive and possibly interested in the new residents. Something howled in the distance, a sound that suggested it had opinions about the food chain and where soft alien cadets belonged on it. Chirrut moved closer to the fire. "I'm adding inadequate predator deterrence information to my complaint list." "Noted," Owen said. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow I'm teaching you all how to make spears." The silence that greeted this announcement was broken only by the crackling fire and the distant sounds of things that definitely had teeth. "Spears," Prismata finally said. "Weapons. You're going to instruct us in the creation of primitive armaments." "Well, I'd teach you advanced armaments, but someone crashed all our plasma rifles." Owen stretched out near the fire, apparently comfortable enough to sleep on bare rock in an alien cave surrounded by potential predators. "Spears it is," Chirrut added another item to his mental. "Complaint form." Sella checked the cave entrance for the 5th time. Nemos cycled his suit's remaining water reserves anxiously. Prismata calculated the statistical likelihood of surviving long enough to regret every decision that had led to this moment. And Owen, the human who had made rope and fire from literally nothing, closed his eyes and appeared to actually fall asleep. The first day of their unplanned survival exercise was complete. None of them had died, which was a low bar for success, but one they'd cleared nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new primitive solutions, and probably several hundred additional items for Chirrut's ever-growing complaint list. But tonight, they had fire, shelter, and the deeply unsettling realization that humanity's apparent superpower was being aggressively competent when everything went wrong. The galaxy, in its infinite wisdom, had never quite prepared them for that. Morning on Epsilon 7 arrived with the subtlety of an alarm system designed by someone who hated sleep. The local fauna apparently believed in starting the day with a chorus of screeches, howls, and sounds that suggested someone was murdering a musical instrument. Owen was already awake, working on what appeared to be very pointy sticks, very deliberately, very carefully pointy sticks. "Those are weapons," Chirrut observed, his antennae still droopy from inadequate rest on stone flooring. "You're crafting implements of violence." "I'm crafting implements of not being eaten," Owen corrected, using a sharp rock to scrape bark from a straight branch. "There's a philosophical difference." Prismata emerged from the back of the cave where she'd spent the night refracting starlight into geometric patterns, probably to maintain her sanity. "The Academy's Code of Conduct, Section 12, Paragraph 4, explicitly prohibits cadets from manufacturing weapons during training exercises. The Academy's Code of Conduct probably also prohibits dying horribly because you were too principled to defend yourself." Owen tested the spear's balance, nodded with satisfaction, and started on another. I'm making 6 of these, one for each of us plus a spare. I don't know how to use a spear, Sela admitted, her ears flat with concern. My species hasn't engaged in physical combat for 7 centuries. Good news. Neither have the predators on this planet met someone using a spear. You'll both be learning together. Nemos, whose suit was now filled with boiled stream water that tasted, according to him, like liquid regret with mineral notes, watched Owen work with gurgling fascination. Your species actually fought other organisms using sharpened wooden implements? Fought organisms, hunted food, defended territory, poked things we were curious about. Spears are very versatile. Owen held up a finished product. Sharp end goes in the predator. Blunt end stays in your hands. Try not to confuse the two. I'm adding insufficient combat training. Prerequisites to my... Chirrut began. To your complaint list, yes, we know, Sela interrupted. Maybe focus on survival first, bureaucracy second. The insectoid looked genuinely offended but accepted the spear Owen handed him. What followed was perhaps the most awkward weapons training session in galactic history. Owen demonstrated basic spear techniques. Thrust, withdraw, maintain distance, aim for vulnerable areas. The alien cadets attempted to replicate these movements with varying degrees of success. Chirrut's multiple limbs gave him surprising reach but questionable coordination. Prismata's crystalline body made her movements precise but rigid. Sela discovered her feline reflexes translated well to stabbing motions, which disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. Nemos just tried not to trip over his hydration suit while holding a pointy stick. This is barbaric, Prismata announced, executing a surprisingly competent thrust. Effective, statistically sound, given our resource limitations, but definitely barbaric. Your ancestors never did anything like this? Owen asked, curious. My ancestors were silicon-based computational matrices before they developed biological forms. They solved problems through mathematical consensus, not pointed sticks. Well, congratulations on your first pointed stick experience. Night fell faster than expected, and with it came sounds from the forest that suggested something large had noticed their campfire and wanted to investigate. The sounds grew closer, accompanied by the snap of branches and a low rumbling that vibrated through the cave floor. Everyone behind the fire, Owen ordered, his voice dropping to dead seriousness. Spears ready. Nemos, you're on fire maintenance. Keep it burning bright. 4 pairs of alien eyes gleamed in the firelight, spears held in trembling appendages, facing the cave entrance where something was definitely approaching. The predator that appeared was exactly the kind of creature that made Academy administrators classify planets as character building. It stood twice Owen's height, had too many teeth distributed across a face that suggested evolution had run out of ideas and just added more murder, and eyes that reflected the firelight with hungry intelligence. It paused at the cave entrance, assessing these strange new creatures and their flickering light source. Hold, Owen whispered. Wait for it. The creature stepped forward. The firelight made its shadow dance across the cave walls like a nightmare deciding whether to commit. Now! 5 spears thrust forward in a chaotic but surprisingly unified motion. Most missed. Chirrut caught the creature's shoulder. Sela's grazed its flank. Owen's found something vital. The predator shrieked, a sound that would haunt their dreams for years, and retreated into the night, leaving blood and the clear message that these particular prey items were more trouble than anticipated. The silence that followed was broken only by 5 cadets breathing hard and realizing they had just survived their first combat encounter using weapons they'd made from forest debris. I am filing the most comprehensive complaint in Academy history, Chirrut announced, still clutching his spear. Right after I learned to make more of these. Owen grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. Outside, the predator's retreat echoed through the forest, spreading word that the new arrivals had teeth of their own, even if they were wooden ones. 3 days turned out to be the exact amount of time required for civilized beings to become disturbingly comfortable with uncivilized living. Chirrut had stopped filing mental complaints somewhere around hour 40 and started organizing knot patterns by efficiency ratings. His section of the cave now featured a display of cordage samples that would have impressed any primitive technology museum, arranged with the kind of obsessive detail that suggested he'd found a new calling. Prismata had documented 17 different plant species, their properties, and optimal harvesting techniques. She'd also calculated that primitive survival had a better resource sustainability index than their Academy's standard equipment loadout, which was causing her some philosophical discomfort. Sela had taken to hunting with an enthusiasm that worried her on multiple ethical levels. She'd successfully caught 3 small creatures, dispatched them with efficiency that awakened instincts she'd been assured were genetically obsolete, and was now teaching herself basic tracking. Nemos had engineered a primitive irrigation system that collected rainwater, filtered it through sand and charcoal, and fed it into his suit reservoir automatically. He called it applied hydromechanics without electronic assistance, and was clearly proud. Owen watched his companions adapt to primitive life with the satisfaction of someone whose bluff hadn't been called. The truth was, he'd been terrible at outdoor activities back on Earth. His camping experience consisted of one disastrous weekend where he'd forgotten matches, packed inadequate clothing, and earned the nickname, "Why did we bring him?" from his friends. But the aliens didn't need to know that. Their camp now featured defensive perimeter markers, organized food storage using woven containers, a designated water purification area, and what Chirrut insisted on calling tactical spear positioning stations. They'd fought off 2 more predator encounters, established a rotation schedule for fire maintenance, and developed a surprisingly efficient division of labor. The rescue shuttle arrived on the morning of day 4, its sensors tracking the crashed training vessel's last known coordinates. The rescue team expected to find desperate cadets, equipment failures, and possibly casualties requiring immediate medical intervention. Instead, they found an organized base camp with smoking fish drying on racks, a thriving fire, defensive barriers, made from sharpened stakes, and 5 cadets who looked more annoyed at the interruption than relieved at rescue. Commander Irix, a veteran of 30 years of Academy operations, stood at the cave entrance with an expression suggesting his reality had encountered unexpected turbulence. "Cadets, we've been searching for 3 days. Are you cooking something?" "Lunch," Sela said, turning a spit that held something that had been alive yesterday. "Would you like some?" "Your emergency transponders were offline. We assumed critical situation." "Critical situation was 3 days ago," Chirrut explained, demonstrating a complicated knot structure. "Now we're just waiting for pickup. Do you know how much tensile strength properly braided vine cordage can achieve? Because I've been running experiments." "You made rope," Irix said slowly, "and spears, and what appears to be a functional, primitive civilization." "Humans call it camping," Owen offered helpfully. "Apparently they used to do it for recreation." Recreation? The commander's species didn't have a word for the expression currently occupying his face. You turned a survival emergency into recreational camping. Prismata approached with a bundle of documentation. "Commander, I've compiled extensive data on sustainable resource management using zero-technology approaches. The efficiency metrics are remarkable. I'm submitting this for Academy curriculum review." The rescue team spent the next hour dismantling the camp, confiscating spears as potential safety violations, and listening to 5 cadets explain various primitive techniques with the enthusiasm of converts describing their new philosophy. Chirrut did eventually file his complaint, which ran to 47 pages and included detailed suggestions for adding primitive survival methodology to standard Academy training. On the flight back to the Academy station, Owen sat back and watched his companions debate the merits of friction fire versus chemical ignition, optimal spear length ratios, and whether knot tying should be a mandatory course. Commander Irix sat down next to him, exhausted. "You're human. Your species actually did all this before developing technology. For thousands of years. And you found it so enjoyable you continued doing it after inventing better options?" Owen grinned. "Some of us never stopped. We call them campers, or preppers, or people who assume technology will eventually fail and want backup plans. Paranoid. Prepared, Owen corrected. There's a difference. Erix was silent for a moment, then asked quietly, "Could you teach more classes? I'm thinking we need to expand our training program." Owen glanced at his fellow cadets, who were now arguing about whether they should have hunted the large predator for its hide, and felt a surge of pride mixed with the guilty knowledge that he'd barely known what he was doing. But they didn't need to know that either. "Sure," he said, "but next time, can we crash? Somewhere with better weather." The galaxy had just learned that humanity's real survival advantage wasn't superior technology or advanced tactics. It was the absolutely unhinged willingness to solve modern problems with ancient solutions and act like this was perfectly normal. Somewhere in Academy headquarters, curriculum designers began writing new course requirements, completely unaware they were about to make camping mandatory. Chirrut was already planning his knot-tying seminar. The universe would never be quite the same.